"Take my horse, just help my brother," the Apache girl pleaded. Jack Thornton had never heard words more desperate in his life. The wind whipped through the desolate landscape, the dust swirling in the midday sun. He stood frozen for a moment, unsure if he had heard her right. Ayana's eyes, dark and full of pain, locked onto his. In them, Jack saw a plea for help, something he couldn't ignore. He had lived his whole life avoiding trouble, sticking to his land and his cattle, letting the world pass him by. But now, this girl, this Apache, was asking him for more than he ever expected to give. What happened to him? Jack asked, his voice rough, as if the words didn't quite belong to him. "He's my brother," Ayana said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They took him. They're going to kill him." The weight of her words hit Jack harder than any storm he'd weathered in the past. A simple plea, but one that changed everything. He had no reason to help. After all, Apache and Cowboy didn't mix, not in this part of the world. But something in her face, something in the way she held herself, told him this wasn't just some ordinary request. It was a desperate cry for help that crossed boundaries. Without thinking, Jack looked at the dusty road that led beyond the ridge. His heart thundered in his chest as if it knew what was coming. He had two choices. Walk away, live his life in peace, or help this girl, and risk everything he knew. Ayana's fingers tightened around the reins of her horse, her eyes never leaving his. The silence between them was thick, but Jack could see the trust she had in him, trust he hadn't earned. "I'll help you," Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt. The decision was made. Ayana's face softened for a moment, and a tiny flicker of hope shone through her exhaustion. She didn't say anything more. She didn't need to. In that moment, Jack understood. She wasn't asking for a hero, just for someone who cared enough to try. "Take my horse," Ayana repeated, her words trembling, "just save him." Jack didn't hesitate. He moved toward her, his hand reaching out to take the reins of the horse. As he touched the leather, the weight of the situation settled on him like a heavy blanket. There was no going back now. He mounted his own horse, his heart racing faster than the thundering hooves beneath him. Ayana rode beside him, and together, they moved into the open wilderness. The wind howled like a wolf on the hunt, but Jack felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. He had been running from his past, from everything that tied him to this land, but now, he was part of something bigger. The tension between them was undeniable, but there was something about the way Ayana held herself, the quiet strength in her movements, that made Jack realize this wasn't just a simple rescue. This was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. Jack didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for sure: helping Ayana meant stepping into a world where no man was an island, where every action had consequences. And as they rode toward the horizon, Jack couldn't help but wonder what the future would bring, for him, for Ayana, and for the world they were about to step into together. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains as Jack and Ayana rode in silence. The wind picked up, swirling dust behind them, but neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with anticipation, yet neither seemed to want to break it. Jack's mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. He had never been one to get involved, especially not with people from a different world, but something about Ayana made it impossible to ignore her. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't just a figure from the stories the townsfolk told, of savages and outlaws. She was real, and she had a story. He could see it in her eyes, the weight of her past, the quiet desperation of someone who had never known true safety. As they rode, the terrain began to change. The flat, endless plains gave way to low hills and jagged rock formations. Jack knew they were close. He had heard stories about the camp she was taking him to, a place where the Apache gathered. It wasn't a place most white men went willingly, and certainly not a place where they were welcomed. The tension in Jack's chest tightened. He had helped her, yes, but what if this was a mistake? What if he had just let himself into a trap? He stole a glance at Ayana. She was focused, her expression unreadable, as if the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. For the first time, he noticed the faint marks on her skin, scars from a life lived in the wild, in the constant threat of danger. He could only imagine the struggles she had faced, the sacrifices she had made for her people. How much farther? Jack asked, breaking the silence at last. His voice was low, rough from the dryness of the ride. Ayanna turned slightly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. Not far, she replied softly. We are almost there. Jack nodded, not knowing what to say. He didn't need to ask her more, he could feel the heaviness in the air. They were close to the camp, and when they arrived, there would be no turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, and Jack knew that by the end of this day, nothing would be the same. They rode on, each lost in their thoughts, the distant sound of hooves echoing in the growing dusk. The land stretched out before them, wild and untamed, just like the lives they led. There was no simple way to explain why Jack was doing this. It wasn't about heroism, or even kindness. It was something deeper, something that had clicked the moment he laid eyes on her. Perhaps it was the fact that Ayanna had asked for nothing more than help, and in return, she had given him something no one else had, a purpose. Jack had spent too many years hiding from the world, and now, for the first time, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. They reached the crest of a hill, and the camp came into view below them. Smoke curled from the center, and the shapes of people moved about, their figures silhouetted by the last light of day. Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. This was it. They were here. He could turn around now and ride back to his quiet life, but he knew that wouldn't be enough. Whatever was waiting in that camp, it was his choice to face it. With a deep breath, Jack urged his horse down the hill, following Ayanna's lead. The night was falling fast, and as they descended into the camp, the world around them seemed to fade away, leaving only the sound of the hooves and the uncertain future that awaited them. As Jack and Ayanna entered the camp, the air shifted. It wasn't just the cool breeze that swept across the land, but the weight of anticipation that seemed to press down on him. The Apache camp was unlike anything Jack had ever seen. The firelight flickered against the dark sky, casting long shadows on the faces of the people gathered around it. The women and men moved with purpose, their eyes sharp, taking in the strangers as they approached. Ayanna guided her horse to the center of the camp, and Jack followed closely behind, trying to keep his nerves in check. He had spent his entire life avoiding conflict, never once stepping into the heart of Apache territory. Now, he was here, right in the middle of it, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into a world he couldn't control. As they dismounted, a figure approached them from the crowd. The man was tall, his face painted in traditional war paint, and his posture commanded respect. Ayanna didn't flinch at his arrival. Instead, she stood tall, her gaze unwavering as she met his eyes. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. This man wasn't just any warrior, he was someone of importance. The tension in the air was palpable. You have brought him, the man said, his voice deep, but not unkind. Jack watched as Ayanna nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. The man's gaze shifted to Jack, sizing him up, as though trying to gauge whether this cowboy was worthy of the trust Ayanna had placed in him. You are the one who helped her, he asked, his words not quite a question, but a statement of fact. Jack cleared his throat, trying to keep his composure. I did, he replied, his voice steady. I did what I could. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Ayanna, his eyes softening just slightly. Jack couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in the man's demeanor. Whatever was happening between them, it was a connection built on something deeper than just this moment. After a long pause, the man finally spoke again, this time addressing Ayanna. You have returned, he said, as if acknowledging something profound. It is not often that one of our own comes back with a stranger. There was no anger in his words, only the weight of centuries of tradition. Ayanna's face remained calm, but Jack could see the faintest flicker of something in her eyes, something that told him this wasn't the first time she had been caught between two worlds. "He is not just a stranger," she said, her voice steady and clear. "He is my ally." The man didn't speak for a moment, his eyes searching Ayana's face as if looking for a deeper truth. Finally, he nodded, as if coming to some silent conclusion. "Then, let him stay," he said, his tone decisive. With that, the tension in the air seemed to dissipate, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Ayana's presence in the camp had shifted something, and now, with Jack at her side, he felt as though they were part of something much larger than themselves. As the man turned and walked away, Jack couldn't help but wonder what had brought him here. What had he truly agreed to when he decided to help Ayana? He didn't know, but the fire burning in the center of the camp seemed to reflect something inside him, something that had been ignited by the simple act of helping someone in need. Ayana's quiet strength and the unspoken bond between them had already changed him, and as he stood there in the flickering firelight, Jack realized that he wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was part of this story, and there was no turning back. The fire in the center of the camp crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the faces gathered around it. The camp was alive with the low murmur of voices, but Jack remained at the edge of the circle, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ayana had led him here, and now he was surrounded by people he didn't understand. He had helped her, yes, but what had he really gotten himself into? As the night wore on, the warriors of the Apache camp moved with a calm precision, preparing their own meals and tending to their horses. Jack felt like an outsider, an intruder in a world he had never been part of. But Ayana was still beside him, her presence steadying him, and that made all the difference. Every time he looked at her, he saw the strength in her, something more than just survival. It was purpose, a fire that had been kindled long ago, burning brightly despite everything that had been thrown at her. As the firelight flickered in her eyes, Jack couldn't help but wonder about the weight of the choices she had made. What had brought her to this point? What had made her so determined to return to her people, to face the consequences of a life lived on the edge? "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked quietly, his voice almost lost in the crackling of the flames. Ayana looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment before it softened. "Regret what?" she asked. "Coming here. Bringing me here," he clarified. "Putting yourself at risk." There was a long pause before she answered, her gaze fixed on the fire. "No," she said simply, her voice steady. "I don't regret it. My people, they need me. I have to do what I can to protect them." Jack didn't know what to say. Her words were simple, but they carried so much weight. She was fighting for something bigger than herself, something he could never fully understand. He had been a part of this world for so long, a world that was defined by boundaries and divisions, but Ayana had crossed those boundaries without hesitation. "You're brave," Jack said, his voice low, almost reverent. Ayana didn't respond right away. She just continued to watch the fire, the flickering light casting shadows across her face. For a moment, Jack thought she wouldn't say anything, but then she turned to him, her gaze steady and sure. "Bravery isn't about not being afraid," she said quietly. "It's about doing what you have to do, even when you are." Jack nodded, taking in her words. He understood what she meant. For so long, he had avoided confronting the things that scared him, the things that made him uncomfortable. He had hidden in his own little world, away from the harsh realities of life. But now, standing beside Ayana, he felt like he was being pulled out of that world, forced to confront his own fears, his own limitations. The fire crackled again, and Jack glanced over at the warriors sitting around it, their eyes flickering with the same quiet determination that Ayana had. He realized, in that moment, that bravery wasn't just about the big, heroic acts. It was about the quiet moments of choice, the decision to stand up, to keep going, even when the road ahead was uncertain. Ayana had made that choice, and now, he was making it too. They sat there together, the fire between them, the night stretching out ahead. Jack didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he could do what Ayanna was asking of him, if he could be the ally she needed. But he did know one thing: he wasn't alone. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a golden glow across the camp. Jack had not slept well, his mind racing with thoughts of the journey ahead, of the uncertain path they were about to take. He stood up early, just as the camp began to stir. The smell of cooking fires and fresh morning air filled the atmosphere, but it did little to ease the tightness in his chest. He had come this far, and now there was no turning back. As he walked through the camp, the warriors were already preparing for the day, their movements swift and practiced. Ayanna was among them, helping with the horses and talking quietly with a few of the women. Jack couldn't help but notice how she moved, with purpose, like someone who belonged here, someone who had always belonged here. He had felt out of place since arriving, but Ayanna seemed like she was at home, a part of something much bigger than himself. Jack approached her, his boots kicking up dust as he walked toward her. She looked up when she noticed him, her expression calm, but her eyes still holding that quiet intensity that Jack had come to respect. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice low but steady. Jack hesitated, unsure of how to answer. Was he ready? What did that even mean? "I don't know if I am," he said honestly, his voice rough. "But I'll follow you." Ayanna studied him for a moment, her gaze piercing, as if she were searching for something in his words. "You're not alone," she said softly. "We do this together." The weight of her words settled over him like a blanket, comforting yet heavy with the truth. Jack knew that Ayanna had faced more than he could imagine, and yet here she was, offering him strength when he felt so uncertain. He nodded, trying to find his own resolve. "I'll be ready," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence he wanted to project. She smiled slightly, the corners of her lips lifting just enough to show that she understood. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the gathering of warriors. Jack followed, his heart thudding in his chest. As they gathered at the edge of the camp, the chief from the night before approached them, his expression solemn but not unfriendly. Jack could feel the eyes of the camp upon him as they waited. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. Ayanna stood beside him, her presence steady, unwavering. Jack could see that the chief was about to speak, his voice carrying authority. "You are welcome here," the chief said, his eyes lingering on Jack for a moment before shifting back to Ayanna. "But know this. There is a price to pay for helping. We do not take lightly the trust that is given." Jack swallowed hard, his throat dry, but he nodded in understanding. He had known there would be consequences, but hearing them spoken aloud made it all too real. The chief turned away, signaling to the others. "Prepare yourselves," he said. "We leave at dawn tomorrow." The weight of his words hung in the air, and Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain: whatever came, he wouldn't be facing it alone. As the camp went back to its routine, Jack looked at Ayanna, who was already preparing the horses. There was no hesitation in her actions, no sign of fear. She was ready. And somehow, Jack knew that by standing with her, he would find his own strength, too. Together, they would face whatever challenges awaited them, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he had a purpose. He just hoped it would be enough. The next day, the air was still and heavy with anticipation as the camp began to prepare for the journey. Jack stood at the edge of the camp, watching Ayanna and the warriors move with the quiet precision of people accustomed to hardship. He felt a sense of unease settle in his chest. There was no turning back now. The chief had made it clear that they would leave at dawn, and Jack had no idea what awaited them beyond the horizon. He wasn't a fighter, he had spent his life working cattle, living a solitary existence. But somehow, in the presence of Ayanna and these Apache warriors, he felt like he had been drawn into a world far bigger than anything he had known before. Ayanna approached him, her horse ready, the reins in her hands. She moved with the same quiet confidence that had marked her from the very beginning. Jack noticed the way her eyes flickered to him as she approached, as if reading him, as if trying to see if he was truly ready. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice soft but firm. Jack shifted his weight, trying to ease the tension that had been building in his shoulders. "Just thinking," he said, his voice rough. "I don't know what I'm doing here." Ayanna didn't reply immediately. She simply stood beside him, watching the warriors prepare. The horses were saddled, the gear was packed, and the fire was slowly dying down. There was a calmness to the camp, but Jack could feel the underlying tension, the uncertainty of what was to come. "You don't have to know everything," Ayanna said after a long pause. "You just have to be here, now. That's enough." Jack looked at her, seeing the strength in her eyes, the way she had come into this world and made it her own. He knew she had already made peace with the path ahead. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm here." With that, they turned to join the others. The journey would be long, and Jack knew that it would take him further from everything he had ever known. But something inside him stirred, something that told him he was meant to be on this road, beside Ayanna, whatever the future held. The chief gathered everyone around, his voice steady as he gave final instructions. "We ride hard today," he said. "We reach the valley by nightfall." Jack felt a shiver of apprehension at the thought of the journey ahead. The valley was known to be treacherous, a place where few outsiders dared to go. The warriors had spoken of it in hushed tones, a place where the land itself seemed to fight back against any who trespassed. But Ayanna's presence. Beside him was a steadying force, and Jack felt something else, too, the sense that he had been waiting for this moment his whole life. As the group set off, the sound of hooves filled the air, and Jack could feel the rhythm of the ride deep in his bones. The landscape stretched out before them, vast and endless. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land as they made their way across the open plains. There was a quiet urgency to the ride, as if the land itself was pushing them forward, urging them to keep moving. Jack rode beside Ayanna, the sound of their horses' hooves the only noise that broke the silence. He stole a glance at her, noticing how she sat tall in the saddle, her posture as strong as ever. There was no hesitation in her movements, no sign of doubt. She was certain of the path ahead. Jack felt a quiet respect for her, the way she had made the decision to return to her people, to face whatever lay waiting for her. He wasn't sure he had that same courage, but in her presence, he felt like he could find it. The journey ahead was uncertain, and Jack knew that they would face challenges he could not yet imagine. But as they rode together, side by side, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, this journey would be the one that would give him the answers he had been searching for all along. The journey continued through the day, the landscape shifting slowly as they moved deeper into unfamiliar territory. Jack could feel the weight of the land pressing down on him, each step farther from everything he knew. The warriors moved with practiced ease, their eyes constantly scanning the horizon, their presence a quiet force that made Jack realize how little he truly understood about the world he was now a part of. Ayanna was ahead of him, her horse moving smoothly through the terrain, as if the land itself was familiar to her. She had not spoken much since they set off, but Jack could see the way her eyes held a quiet determination, as though she was preparing herself for something that lay ahead. It was in her silence, in the steady rhythm of her movements, that Jack saw the depth of her resolve. She was not just riding for herself, she was carrying something far heavier, something that Jack could not fully grasp. The land they were traveling through was wild and untamed, but there was a strange beauty to it. The towering cliffs in the distance seemed to guard the valley they were headed toward, their jagged peaks cutting into the sky like ancient sentinels. The further they rode, the more Jack felt like an outsider, the more out of place he became. He wasn't a warrior, and he certainly wasn't accustomed to the rugged lifestyle of the Apache. But he was here, with Ayanna, and he knew that whatever happened, he had to see it through. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they reached a clearing at the foot of the cliffs. The warriors dismounted, moving swiftly to set up camp. Jack followed Ayanna, his mind still reeling from the uncertainty of the journey. The camp was quieter here, the vastness of the land surrounding them creating a feeling of isolation that Jack couldn't shake. As the fire was lit, the warmth of the flames did little to ease the chill in his bones. He sat down near the edge of the fire, watching as Ayanna and the others prepared their meal. There was something calming about watching her work, the way she moved with such purpose, each action deliberate and measured. It was as if she had been born for this life, for this purpose. Jack's thoughts were interrupted when Ayanna approached him, holding a bowl of food. "You should eat," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. Jack nodded, grateful for the gesture. He had not realized how hungry he was until the smell of the food reached him. As he ate, he watched the warriors, who had gathered around the fire, their faces shadowed in the flickering light. They were all so different from the people he was used to. They carried themselves with a quiet strength, a confidence that came from living in a world that demanded it. Jack had never known that kind of strength before, and as he sat there, eating beside Ayanna, he realized how much he had yet to learn. "What happens when we reach the valley?" Jack asked, his voice breaking the silence. Ayanna looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "We'll see," she said simply. "But we will be ready." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know what awaited them, but he knew that whatever it was, it would test them both. "Will we be safe?" he asked, his voice softer now. Ayanna's gaze softened, but she didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the campfire, the flames dancing in her eyes. "We will be," she said quietly. "As long as we stand together." Jack didn't know what that meant yet, but he believed her. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a place in this world, a purpose that was more than just surviving. He had made a choice, and now, he was on a path with Ayanna, a path that would lead them wherever they were meant to go. The fire crackled, and for a moment, the camp fell silent. Jack sat there, his thoughts swirling, but there was a sense of peace that settled over him. He was no longer just a cowboy on the edge of the world. He was part of something larger, something that mattered. And whatever came next, he would face it with Ayanna by his side. The morning came too quickly, the sky lightening from dark to soft blue as the first light of dawn touched the edges of the valley. Jack awoke to the sound of the camp stirring around him, the soft rustling of movement, and the low murmurs of the warriors preparing for the journey ahead. He sat up slowly, stretching out his stiff muscles, feeling the weight of the day settle over him. The landscape around them had an otherworldly beauty, the valley surrounded by towering cliffs that seemed to reach up to the heavens. It was a place that demanded respect, a place that seemed to hold secrets of its own. Ayanna was already up, her figure moving gracefully as she gathered her things, preparing for the ride. Jack watched her, feeling the same mixture of awe and uncertainty that had followed him since they had arrived at the camp. She was a part of this world, this rugged, wild life. He was still trying to understand his place in it. She looked over at him, catching his gaze. "We'll be ready," she said, her voice steady. There was a quiet confidence in her words, something Jack had come to rely on over the past few days. She had been his guide through all of this, leading him not just through the land, but through the emotions and fears that came with it. Jack nodded, though he wasn't sure if he felt ready. But he knew he would follow her. He had already made the decision, and there was no turning back now. As the warriors mounted their horses and the camp began to pack up, the atmosphere shifted. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a sense that they were about to embark on something important, something that would change everything. Jack could feel it in his bones. They rode out together, Ayanna and Jack side by side, moving through the valley with the others trailing behind. The land stretched out before them, vast and untamed, the horizon endless. Jack couldn't help but feel a small sense of peace as they rode, the rhythm of the horses' hooves steady and grounding. They weren't just traveling through the land, they were becoming a part of it, blending into the world that Ayanna knew so well. As the hours passed, the valley seemed to close in around them, the towering cliffs narrowing their path. It was quiet now, the only sounds the soft snorts of the horses and the distant calls of birds. Jack's mind began to wander, the quiet giving him space to think. What was waiting for them at the end of this journey? What would he find when they reached the heart of Apache land? He didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at him. But then he looked at Ayana, riding confidently in front of him, and he felt a sense of calm. She had been here before, she knew this world, and she was leading them forward. Jack wasn't alone. He had a place in this journey, even if he didn't understand it fully yet. They continued on, the sun climbing higher in the sky as they rode deeper into the valley. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading towards something much bigger than the land itself. The journey wasn't just about reaching a destination, it was about what they would discover along the way. And with Ayana at his side, Jack felt ready to face whatever came next. The unknown no longer seemed as daunting. It was just another part of the path they were walking together. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as they reached the heart of the valley. The towering cliffs that had surrounded them now stood as silent witnesses to the journey they had undertaken. Jack could feel the weight of the moment settling in, the quiet anticipation of what was to come. The camp was set up quickly, the warriors moving with practiced ease, their actions smooth and efficient. Jack found a spot near the edge of the camp, his eyes scanning the valley, the vast open space stretching out before him. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this was different. This was the kind of place that had the power to change everything. He glanced over at Ayana, who was already helping the others with the horses. She moved with confidence, her presence a steady force that seemed to draw everyone around her. Jack couldn't help but admire her strength. She had been through so much, and yet, she carried herself as if nothing could break her. He had never known someone like her before, someone who could face the unknown with such resolve. As the fire was lit in the center of the camp, the warriors began to gather around it, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. Jack sat down beside the fire, his thoughts racing. What was waiting for them tomorrow? What did the future hold for him, for Ayana, for the others? He didn't have the answers, but he knew one thing for sure, he wasn't alone. He had made the decision to stand beside Ayana, and now, no matter what came next, he would face it with her. Ayana joined him by the fire, her movements quiet but purposeful. She sat down beside him, her gaze meeting his for a moment before she looked away, staring into the flames. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. He didn't know if he was ready, but he knew he couldn't turn back now. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready," he said after a moment, his voice steady. "But I'm here." Ayana nodded, her expression unreadable, but Jack could see the faintest flicker of understanding in her eyes. "That's enough," she said simply. The camp settled into a quiet rhythm as the night stretched on. Jack watched the warriors, their faces serious and focused, the firelight dancing in their eyes. They weren't just waiting for something to happen, they were preparing. Preparing for whatever lay ahead, for whatever the future held. And Jack realized, for the first time in a long time, that he was part of something bigger than himself. He wasn't just a cowboy anymore. He was part of this journey, part of this world, and whatever came next, he would face it with Ayana and the others by his side. The fire crackled in the silence, the night stretching on as Jack sat beside Ayana, feeling the weight of the journey ahead. The road wasn't clear, and there were no guarantees. But as the flames flickered, Jack felt something shift inside him. He was ready, in his own way. Ready to face whatever came next, with Ayana by his side.